video. We're going to talk about the remaining evidences of evolution, and your assignment this week, you're just going to be going on to It's Learning and answering the questions that I've given you. There isn't a research aspect this time. So all the questions that are in the assignment are coming from skills that you'll learn in this video. So far we've been talking about evolution. So we're talking about the change in a population over time. We're not talking about the change in an individual. Okay. And this is how modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. I like this little graphic here, if you can see my mouse, because we've got the ancient organisms down here, and over time they are branching out, they are mutating, they are experiencing natural selection and evolving their populations into various species. Okay, each section where the branch meet represents an ancestor that they had in common. We said that there's 4 types of evidences that we would be discussing, and last module we went over anatomical evidence. This week we're going to talk about the remaining 3. We're going to talk about genetic evidence that supports the theory of evolution, embryological evidence, and fossil evidence. So genetic evidence, when we went through our genetics unit, we learned all about the DNA sequences A, T, C, G. Okay, and we can use those patterns to determine how related 2 individuals are or are not. And the way we do that is using a process called gel electrophoresis. Gel electrophoresis is when you take segments of DNA and it's put into this chamber with gel that's a little thicker than Jello. And when you apply electricity to it, it causes the DNA fragments to travel through the gel. Once you highlight the DNA, you can see, the pieces that are larger and heavier don't make it as far. The smaller pieces can make it much further, right? And we can look at who has DNA shapes or sizes that are most similar. And so we can figure out who is most related. So for example, in these deer, we have this common ancestor. Okay, so this is the ancient version of the DNA. And we're comparing it to 3 modern day species. And if we look at how many lines they have in common, we are looking for who has the most in common with the ancestor, right? If you look at this deer species, they only have 3, and out of those 3, only 2 match, okay? If we look at 3, we've got 1 match, 2, 3, 4, 5 DNA matches. That's a lot. And then if we look at the last one, we've got 1, 2, 3. So even though 2 and 4 have some DNA in common, number 3 has the most DNA in common. So they're going to be most related to the common ancestor, right? They have most of their DNA in common with them. And we can do this for all sorts of things. This is done for different species. It doesn't just have to be the same species. We could compare whales and horses if we wanted to. This is also how we figure out who is a parent of an individual. You take the parent's DNA and you compare it with the child. And this is also how DNA evidence is analyzed when it's found on at a crime scene. They'll take the crime scene DNA and run it, and then they'll compare it to their suspect to figure out if the DNA matches. Another way that we can look at this information is through a comparison table. And there's two ways. You can look at a table that shows how similar they are, their percent in common. So for example, if we look at a human and say a panda, they share 79% of similarities, whereas human and the beetle only share 59% in common. That's not very much. And so you can figure out, okay, if we want to know who is most related to the sea urchin, right? The sea urchin has 60 with the human, 62 with the panda, 63 with the tortoise, and only 58 with the beetle and 50 with yeast. So that means the sea urchin is going to be most related to the tortoise of all of these species in the table. Okay, so you're looking for the highest number. The highest number means that they are the most related. We can do the opposite though. We can look at the lowest number means they are most related. Okay, whenever I give you a table, I will let you know if you're looking for the differences, meaning the lower number, or if you're looking for similarities, which is the higher number. Okay, this table means that, the horse and the donkey only have one difference in a certain DNA sequence. That means they are very, very similar. But if we look at the horse and say the wheat plant, they have 46 differences. That's a lot of differences. So they are not very related. Okay? And so the question will ask you, who is most related to the whale? So you would have to look at the whale from both the side and the top and figure out which number in the whale column is lowest. And so if you look here, right here we have the number 4 with the whale, and that means that the whale is most related to the donkey out of all these animals here. Hopefully with your CER, you got the point that whales are actually descendants of land animals. Even if you said aquatic, that's okay as long as you provided evidence to support it. But the fact that they have hip bones means that their ancestors used to have legs, which suggests that they came from land animals. All right. Our next type of evidence is embryological evidence. This is looking at what does the fetus look like as it's developing. Okay, and we can use similarities in how they develop to look at similarities in history. And if you look at this image here, this is stage 1 of development, and all these very different species look very similar as they start developing. So, here's a fish, looks quite similar to a tortoise, which looks quite similar to a cow, which even looks similar to a human. As they continue to grow, though, they start to show more of their differences. There's still quite a few similarities here. So as you can see, the rabbit and the human still look very similar, and the cow and the pig, right? And then the further related they are, the further differences you see in the fetus, okay, in the final stage. So the fish is way, way different from all the others. It is least related. Salamander, turtle, right, chicken. And then here you can see in these final ones, they actually look quite similar. These are our mammals over here. All right, so we can look at their developing babies to see how they're similar. And then finally, our last evidence is fossil evidence. So what are fossils? They're preserved remains of an ancient organism, or it could be evidence that an ancient organism was there. So you might have footprints or paw prints, claw prints, right? And then we can use these fossils to figure out changes that have happened over time. They can figure out how old certain fossils are, and they make a timeline of it. That timeline is called the fossil record. So scientists around the world contribute their data to this record, and they organize it to figure out when certain species came about, when other species went extinct, and how they might be related. You can figure out where they lived in certain time periods. And so for every fossil that they find, they use carbon dating to figure out how old that fossil is, and then they put it on this timeline. So here's this timeline we have, millions of years ago on the left-hand side, and then you can see using fossils, they figured out where each of these events occurred. So, for example, the first birds the bird fossils that they found were around 150 million years ago. The other thing that's important is that fossils can be shown to be common ancestors of species that are alive today. So we can find the ancient organisms of today's species. For example, it had been thought that birds and dinosaurs were related, but they didn't have much evidence to show that. They had flying dinosaurs, but they weren't sure if there was a relationship to today's birds until they found this fossil. This is Archaeopteryx. I know he looks like a jumbled mess, but this is the first fossil that they found that suggests that it was the common ancestor to both the dinosaurs and today's birds, because it is the remains of a dinosaur. However, as you can see in this pattern here, I know it's a little bit blurry, it had feathers. And that's a common trait of today's birds, is that they have feathers. So that suggests that the dinosaurs and the birds are related. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to one last bit here. How do we show relationships between species? So once we find out who is and is not related, how can we put that into a diagram? We use a cladogram. I apologize for how blurry this image is, but a cladogram is used to show the relationships between multiple species, and the closer that the branches are together, the more related. The further the branches, the less related. So let's look at this image here. For each branch, we're looking at a feature. Everything above that, all the branches above that point have to have that feature. So for example, here's a lancelet. It does not have a spine, a spinal column, but all the animals above it do. So that's why it is least related. From there, our next feature is which animals have jaws. Well, the lamprey, which is similar to an eel, does not have a jaw. So that's where its similarities end. So we draw its branch there. Right? It's more related than the lancelet, but less related than, say, the tuna. Okay? Because now the feature we're looking for is who has 4 walking legs. Okay? Everything above this point has that feature. The tuna does not. That's where its journey ends, and we draw its branch. Okay? And it keeps going. So for the final one, we're looking at who has hair, right? The leopard has all of these things. It has a spine, a jaw, 4 walking legs, an amniotic egg, which means that it has like kind of like an egg yolk. And it has what's called an amniotic sac. Anyhow, and then hair. It has all these features. Okay? Out of these 6 individuals, the turtle is most related to the leopard because it has all the same features except for hair. Okay? And so in your assignment, what I'll do is I'll give you an image and I'll ask you about who is most related, who is least related, and you might have to tell me why. Okay? So that's it for this week. We covered the remaining evidences of evolution and how we show relationships between species. So you're going to answer the questions within Module 5 and analyze the different diagrams that I give you.